today from 2 to 3. All right. We are in this series, and we've been looking at Moses' life and how it relates to Jesus and us. So take a look at the screen.
Amid oppression, injustice, and slavery, God's greatest works often arise. A child was born to be a deliverer, but a genocidal ruler had other plans. God forged a way, but the deliverer found himself in a wilderness shaped by isolation and tending a flock. God gave him an assignment to speak to his people through signs and wonders. It's the story of Moses and the story of Jesus. This is the gospel according to Moses.
Let me add a good morning. I drove back late last night from Atlanta, and I did it with zero grudge in me because I just love being with you, all right? There's so many things I'm thankful for you guys as a faith family. I'm thankful that, what Todd just announced about the open house and everything, that's all possible because so many of you have sacrificially made all of that possible through just giving and praying. I'm thankful that you are a faith family that likes to go deep, and there's so many things about you that challenges me and encourages me, spurs me on, and I'm also thankful that you love to have fun. All right? So I stand in the back, and I'm just kind of looking across, and while the service has started, I'm thinking, okay, I see high school jerseys, I see college, I see NFL, I see NBA. You love dressing up and having a good time with the whole team day, and we'll do this every year because I just think it's fun to celebrate and stuff. A week ago, so Labor Day weekend, historically what happens with Labor Day weekend is the kickoff for college football in particular, and there's like this explosion of activity over about 5 days. All right, so last weekend, there's college football on Thursday night, Friday night, all day Saturday, Sunday afternoon, and Monday night. And you've waited all summer long. Now listen, if you are around here for much, you know that my family, we love college football. And I unapologetically will tell you that last Saturday, I wasted the day watching college football. Because it's like this, just an explosion of all of the activity. We're today going to see a different type of an explosion. We have, I've been walking through this series, The Gospel According to Moses, and we've talked about how the life, the ministry, the principles in the life of Moses are this foreshadowing of the life, the ministry, the teachings of Jesus as well. And what we've seen so far, and I'm not going to recap everything, I would certainly encourage you to go back on our website and you can track through the whole series, but so far in the life of Moses, there's been a lot of waiting. Like God supernaturally, in Moses' birth, God pulled him and saved him. And then God planted him for 40 years in the palace. And I think while he was there, he learned a lot of good stuff. I think he probably learned a lot of stuff about leadership. I think Moses, just watching and seeing and being exposed to things, learned a lot about military prowess and how to win battles. But God didn't need just a leader or a military leader. God needed a shepherd for what he was about to do. And so Moses spends 40 years doing the laborious, tedious, dare I say it, boring work of being with sheep in the wilderness. All right? But today we're going to see in just some verses an explosion of, okay, game on now. Moses is ready. Let's get to work. If you got a Bible with you, I'm going to encourage you to turn to Exodus chapter 3. And here's what we're going to do this morning. I'm going to walk through almost verse by verse a lot of things that are going on. And this passage is packed with information that's really relevant to people just like me, just like you, who sometimes feel like, man, this battle that I'm facing just will not stop. And sometimes I feel like I've won, and then I realize, no, the circumstances that I'm in, a relationship that just weighs so heavy on me, and it doesn't change, and it feels like God has just turned his back, and I don't hear anything, I don't see anything, there's nothing going on. For people just like you and me, there's some really good principles. Here's what I will make this promise to you. We're going to put up, we'll cover a verse or so, and then I'm going to put up a principle that we can learn from this. And I'm going to make a pledge to you, I will not give you false promises. Because we tend to do this quite a bit with Old Testament stories. That we take Old Testament stories and we take from that, well, then God promises that your life's going to look like that too. Can I just tell you that, like, not every big wall that you come up against, like, it is insurmountable, this circumstance in your life. Not every wall that you face, if you just praise a lot and you worship a lot, the wall comes tumbling down. It happened at Jericho. But I can't promise you that your life's going to be like that. And I can say that because I, like you, have done life. Oh, God will do things as I worship. God will do things, but I can't promise you that the circumstances are just going to crumble right in front of your face. I can't promise you that every time you feel outsized in a battle, if you just be faithful, that you're going to win the battle. Oh, it worked for David. But sometimes the battles that like even being faithful to the Lord, sometimes I take an L with it. Right? Sometimes the battle, sometimes it just wins. Now, God does some other things that are more important than the battle. But I promise you, I will not make false promises to you as we walk through this. So, let's just dive in. Exodus chapter 3, we'll start just at verse 1. Caleb mentioned this a little bit last week. I want to highlight something here. Now, Moses was pasturing the flock. This is at the end of 40 years of him chasing sheep around. Moses was pasturing the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, at the time, Horeb was not called the mountain of God. That comes later. Moses is writing this well after. It's almost eerie, some of the things that happen on Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb also is known as Mount Sinai. Here's some of the things that God does on Mount Sinai, on Mount Horeb. One is, he's about to appear to Moses in this burning bush. And you kind of probably foresaw this is where we're going to go. What's about to happen happens there. Later, they come back, when the Hebrew people leave Egypt, they come back to this spot, and Moses receives the Ten Commandments. You can flash forward a couple centuries later, and Elijah, this prophet of God, who was an amazing man, after this dramatic battle that he fights against the pagan gods around, he flees, he's exhausted, and he flees, and he runs, and he hides on a mountain, and God appears to him there. That's this place, Mount Horeb. And then later on in Elijah's life, God on this mountain gives Elijah this vision of who's going to succeed him afterwards. This is like this focused place where God does this amazing work. Here's what I think is really interesting. It's the west side of the wilderness. Like on this day, this was not, the mountain of God to Moses. This was just the west side of the wilderness. You know what Horeb means? It means desolate, deserted. Right? It's like this, it's a desert, it's a deserted place, it's a desolation, and that's where he is. And something amazing is about to happen. Here's a principle for us, all right? Nothing is wilderness to God. All right? Nothing is like humdrum, just whatever. The most dry, voiceless, non-activity place, nothing is wilderness to God. You know what Moses did exceptionally well that day? Nothing. He's just doing what he was supposed to be doing in the mundane. I love the word that Caleb used last week when he was talking about Moses being a shepherd. It was habitual. All Moses did on this day, he just did what he was supposed to be doing. And nothing, when I do that, when I just do what God wants me to be doing, even the mundane, nothing is a wilderness to God. verse 2 and 3. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, Moses, he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. All right, couple thoughts here. Who appears to Moses in the burning bush? It says the angel of the Lord. A lot of times when we see the word angel, we literally think of angels, right? But the word really is the messenger of the Lord. But it's not, notice the article on, and it's written this way, the article on, it's not now a messenger of the Lord, it's the messenger of the Lord. And most Bible scholars will say this is Jesus appearing to Moses in the middle of the bush. And one of the reasons why we say that, we're guessing at that? No, because a little bit later on, like in the next verses, it's God speaking to Moses from the bush. Not God through an angel. No, God spoke to Moses from the bush. This is Jesus appearing to Moses, having a little conversation. So, would you with me for just imagine a little bit of time span with this? Moses is walking, he sees this bush, but he notices that the bush is on fire, but it's not being consumed. You can't just walk by something, see a fire, and go, oh, well, it's not being consumed. You got to sit and look for a little bit, right? Like you don't know that, because it takes a while for a bush to be consumed by fire, so to notice that it's not being consumed, you got to be sitting and looking at it for a little bit. What's going on here? Like, what is this? What's the importance of the bush is on fire, but it's not being consumed? And there's a variety of different, okay, here's what that means. Here's what, I read this and I like this, all right? And I think there's a variety of reasons why this is important. But one of the reasons that some Bible commentators feel like that what this signifies, that the bush on fire is kind of like the Hebrew people. But they're not being consumed. Like they're going through difficult times, but it's not destroying them. Check these words out. This is millennia later, all right? Paul wrote this in the New Testament. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7 through 9 says this, but we have this treasure in our earthen containers, meaning the Holy Spirit dwelling within us, so that the extraordinary greatness of the power will be of God and not from ourselves. We are, here it is, this is on fire but not consumed. We are afflicted in every way but not crushed. I take it on the chin, but I'm not destroyed by it. We're perplexed but not despairing, persecuted but not abandoned. We're struck down but not destroyed. All right. One of the things that I love with this, what we find with this story here, is that Moses, it was so crystal clear that this was a message from God. Right? I mean, God speaking from a bush was crystal clear. Oh, this isn't just some weird event that, right? I think that's God saying. All right? It'd be like if you had a job offer that was being given to you, but you didn't know if you should take it or not. And so you're talking to the person who's giving you the offer on your phone, and then your phone goes out because your battery runs out, and you're thinking, that's a sign from God. It might be a sign you just need a new phone, right? But this was so crystal clear. No, because when God sends signs to us, it's not, this could be. It's just clear, right? It's just clear. Here's a principle for us from this. God's power endures in us, even in affliction. Because some of us walked in here this morning, we feel like, yeah, my life's a burning bush right now too. Like, I just feel like the circumstances I'm in are like a fire, and it is, but I'm not destroyed. God's power in us endures in us even in affliction. And we could sit around and tell stories in your own life that you would validate that. In fact, you'd say, not only was that I wasn't crushed, but what God did in the midst of that is good. All right, let's go to verse 4 and 5. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, all right, God sees that Moses paused, and he turns aside, and he's looking at this burning bush. God called to him from the midst of the bush, all right? God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then God said, well, do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you're standing is holy ground. Now, listen, Moses had never heard God speak before. I mean, Moses probably didn't know anybody that had heard God speak before. It was a very uncommon, almost unheard of thing. So for God to speak from the bush was like, oh, all right. He calls Moses by name. He doesn't say, hey, psst, right? It's like he called Moses. This is personal. When God speaks to you and I, even this morning, right? When God speaks, it's personal. It is, man, God doesn't speak to just my head. He speaks to my heart. This is personal. Moses. And then he says this most odd thing. Don't come near here. For the place on which you're standing is a deserted wasteland. That's not what he said. Even though that's exactly what this was. This is the west side of the wilderness. Moses, don't listen, the place on your standing is holy ground. Take your shoes off. What's that? All right, the take your shoes off thing. I think about like when, if you came to my house, all right, and in Moses' day, it's not like they have shoes and socks. They have sandals and dirty feet. And God's saying, take your sandals off. Like if you came to my house and you were wearing slides, right, and your feet were kind of dirty, I'm telling you, please don't take your sandals off. And God's telling him, take your sandals off. Why? Because when you take your footwear off, you walk very carefully. Right now, maybe not so when you're 8 years old, because you got a lot of tissue on the bottom of your feet when you're young, and you can go run on thorns and it doesn't matter. You get, Moses is 80. And when Moses takes his sandals off, he's looking everywhere. Here's the message here. You better be careful. All right. I love this, that 40 years later, Moses' successor, a young man by the name of Joshua, gets into the promised land, and he's leading the Hebrew people in. First time they've stepped foot in the promised land after they've come out of Egypt. And they've come to this city, it's a walled city, Jericho, and they're going to do battle against it. And the night before battle, Joshua's just walking around, all right, just looking, and this is on the ground. They're getting ready to do battle on. And he comes across a man in the night, which was an angel. And here's what Joshua chapter 5, verse 15. The captain of the Lord's army, that's who Joshua comes up on. The captain of the Lord's army said to Joshua, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. It's the exact same wording. It was said to Moses in the west side of the wilderness. It's said to Joshua on the battleground. Holy ground. You know what made that holy ground? Because God is there and he's doing work. When you go to work tomorrow, to your mundane job, among people that you really would rather not work around, that's holy ground. When you go to school tomorrow, and you got to go through all the stuff you got to go through at school, that's holy ground. When you come home and there's tension, that's holy ground. You get on the internet, on those sites, the internet's holy ground. Well, the internet's it's not holy ground. It is when God is there. And when God is here, then where I go, that becomes holy ground. We too walk on holy ground. That doesn't feel very holy. Well, the west side of the wilderness didn't feel holy either. The night before battle, that didn't feel like holy ground. It felt like battleground. We too walk on holy ground. Doesn't matter where you are. It's a place where God can do work. Verse 6. He, God, said also, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. I love that. And Moses was just like, he knew it was God. I'm the God of your father, of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And Moses just like, I can't even look. I was watching a week ago, This gets to my love of college football. I was watching College Game Day, and I'm just kind of in and out of the room, and I see that there's an illusionist, all right, a magician, all right, no such thing as magic, but you know what I'm saying. He's an illusionist, and he's speaking at in like this amphitheater to a football team. I think it was Texas A&M, all right. So he brings two guys down. And both of them football players, all right, and they're standing one on each side of him. And he said, here's what I want you to do, guys. I'm going to put my hand down. All right, you put your right hand in. You put your right hand. All right. You put your left hand in. You put your left hand in. And so he's like this, all right. And so he looks to the guy on his right, and he says, hey, I want you to think of this season. I want you to think of one word that you want to describe this season. Okay, I got it. You got it? All right? He goes, yeah, I got it. Now, I don't know you at all. We haven't talked about this. No. He goes, okay, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and then you're going to yell your word out, all right? So he goes, all right, you ready? Yeah. 1, 2, 3. And I can't remember what he said, all right? Let's just say dominate, all right? So 1, 2, 3, dominate, all right? He goes, oh, that's amazing. And so they all take their hands down. He looks at the guy on his left side, and he goes, would you just kind of raise your left hand and show everybody? And the word is written on his hand. And everyone's like, oh. And then he looks, and they sit down, and he looks down at the quarterback, and he says, I want you to come up here for a second. And so he says, here's the deck of cards. Pick any card. You got it? You know what it is? Yeah, I know what it is. He goes, would you show everybody what the card is? Okay, it's a queen of spades, all right? And he puts it back in the deck, and puts the deck away and everything. And he goes, can you take your shoe off? And the quarterback takes his shoe off, and the quarterback's like, And so, sure enough, he holds his shoe up, and on the inside of his shoe is the queen of spades, all right? And the quarterback's like, oh, my word, all right? And he goes, hey, listen, if you were going to call somebody, a friend of yours, and tell them what has just happened, who would you call? And he said, I'd call Kelly or whatever, right? And he goes, the guy reaches inside the shoe, and he starts to turn the card around, and the quarterback's like, I can't even look. And sure enough, the name was on the inside. Okay, it's all this illusion stuff. But I can't even look. Here's the principle for you and I, and this is a promise, and I don't care if your name's Moses or not, don't trifle with God. Moses was so right, you better not look. He was dead on right here. Don't trifle with God. Even in the sense of, yeah, but I don't feel like God hadn't spoken at all in my situation, and I've been walking through this. I feel like I'm in bondage to something. I've had this habit that I'd rather get rid of, and God's not doing anything. Don't trifle. Because when God says it's time to act, be ready. Verse 7 through 9. The Lord said, hey, Moses, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt. Your parents have probably passed away by now. All right, Moses' parents were probably dead by this point. But he's got an older brother and an older sister, and they, as we know, are still alive. Moses probably had people that he hung with. I've seen the oppression of my people. They happen to be yours too, who are in Egypt. And I've given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters, for I'm aware of their sufferings. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and to bring them up from the land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite. And now, behold, the cry of the sons of Israel has come to me. Furthermore, I've seen the oppression with which the Egyptians are oppressing them. I don't know how much the bondage of the Hebrews was pressing on the heart of Moses. But because he was a Hebrew and he knew it, I know it bothered him. Now, it's been 40 years since he's seen them. But it's a cloud that's been with him. And I know it bothered him too. We don't know how much, but we're just going to assume that like Moses had an issue with what was going on. But it's also probably true that it didn't sting as much now as it did then. Right? Out of sight, out of mind kind of a deal. Hey, it bothered me a whole lot when I left, but that's 40 years ago. A lot of time has passed. A lot of distance between us. That maybe Moses had forgotten how much God really cares about his people. Here's a principle for you and I. Those promises that we forget, God remembers. God calls to mind. And it's not just that he calls to mind, he feels passion. God's passions don't wane over time like you and I, they do. 400 years to God is a blink. 40 years that Moses has been gone is just a heartbeat to God. It's nothing. Check this out from the New Testament. Here's the covenant that you and I live in. If you're a follower of Jesus, this applies to you. I am confident of this very thing, that he who began a good work in you will perfect it until the day of Christ Jesus. God doesn't forget his promises. As a 16-year-old high school sophomore, when I gave my life to Jesus, and I did it with passion, like I felt it, there's been a lot of time. There's been over 40 years that has passed since that time. God's passions in that moment for me have not changed at all. And God made a promise that the work he began in me then, he is not going to shelve it and give up on it, even when I shelve it and give up on it. What I forget, and I have forgotten my covenant with him many a time, but what I forget, God does not forget. God remembers, and he feels as strongly and passionately about it as the day that it first happened. And so God had said that he'd come down. I've come down. Those are action words, right? And I bet if I'm Moses, I'm sitting there, I'm listening to this, hot dog, we're on. All right, God said, it's time. 400 years, it's time to end all of that. Let's go. I can't wait to see what happens. I'm so fired up. This is the best day of my life until God finishes his statement. Therefore, verse 10, come now, and I'm going to send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. Now, because God remembers his promise, God said, Moses, I'm going to free my people. Let's go. Because you're going to be the instrument that I'm going to do it through. Here's the principle for us, and this is quite often the case. We pray for God to move. He might do it through us. God, would you please work on my marriage? He will. And he might start with you. God, would you please, I've been praying for my kids, and they just seem like we're just kind of like this, and I know that's not your heart. Would you change that? He will. But he might do it starting with you. God, I have this, it's a habit. It's not a good habit. Let's just call it what it is. It's an addiction. Would you just remove that from me? Okay. But it might mean that you have to do the first part of that. Like God, we pray for God to move, but where he might do it is through you and for me. And so what Moses does is what I would do, and it's probably what you would do. He goes into excuses mode. I love the thought about the people of Hebrew walking out of the people of, God's people walking out of Egypt. I love all of that, but it's on me. And so Moses goes into excuses mode. I'm not going to read all of this, but the rest of chapter 3, all the way through most of chapter 4, is Moses stuttering his way through and lamely picking out excuses from the sky. Let me summarize all of these, because I do the same kinds of excuses. You do the same thing. And here's the principles. Verse 11 and 12, Moses says, I'm sorry. Well, who am I to go do that? You're talking about Pharaoh. Who am I? To which God says, I'll be with you. God doesn't even address the issue of who am I. You know why? Because it doesn't matter who Moses is. Well, it doesn't matter who you are. I'm going with you. Verse 13 to 22, Moses says, okay, well, if you're going with me, can I dare ask, and who are you? Right? Because Moses wasn't like this God follower like he becomes later in his life, because he didn't know about it. Right? He didn't have so much as a name for God. So he says, who are you? And God says, my name is Yahweh. And I'll get to that in a second. I'm the God of the covenant of your fathers. And I remember the covenant that I have with them. Tell them that I hear them And here's what's going to happen. And he lets Moses, ahead of time, he knows, here's what's going to happen when you get there. The value of, I think, all of this is the name that God goes by, Yahweh. I am who I am. That is a mic drop name. Who are you? I am who I am. Okay. It is the, and we mentioned on this on Easter Sunday, all right? I am who I am is the answer to, well, it is what it is. And God says, yeah, it is what it is, but I am who I am. It is, I got this. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 9, Moses says, well, what if they don't buy it? What if they don't believe you sent me? I mean, you, who you go by this kind of a bizarre name, I am who I am, the I am sent me to you. And what if they say, okay, whatever? What if they don't believe me? And God says, hey, check these miracles out. And he performs 2 of these 3 miracles in Moses' sight right there. He says, hey, Moses, take that walking stick that you are so accustomed to. You know every groove in this walking stick. It is yours. You know exactly what it is. Would you lay it on the ground for a second? Lays it on the ground, becomes a snake. And Moses does what I would do. I hate snakes. All right? Which means Todd just heard this, and there's going to be snakes or plastic snakes or rubber snakes in my office all the time. Hate snakes. And Moses is terrified, and God says, all right, you see that? And Moses is like, yeah, I see it. Would you pick it up now? Oh. And so he reaches down, picks it up by the tail, turns it into a stick again. And God says, okay, you see that? All right? Okay, do that before them. And you don't think that works? Okay, take your hand and stick it inside your cloak. So Moses sticks his hand inside his cloak. He goes, pull it out now. And it's leprous, like snow. It's white, scabby, disgusting looking. It looks like it's rotten. It probably smelled a little bit too. And Moses is like, oh, this got real personal real quick. And God said, put it back in your cloak, stick it in your cloak, pull it out. It's like normal again. And God says, hey, if they don't believe that, then take water, pour it on the ground, and it'll turn like blood. And well, here's what God's saying, all right? God's saying, all right, look, check out the miracles. They'll believe you. It's not your job to convince people. Never has been. That's God's job. You just do what you're supposed to do, and I'll take care of them believing you or not. Moses says, but I don't speak real well. All right? Now, here's what's really interesting to me. If you guys remember, when it was talked about Moses when he was in the palace, it said he was a man with power in words and deeds. He was an eloquent man. But all of a sudden, I don't speak real well. It's like he's fishing for excuses. And so God says, I'm sorry. Who made the mouth that you have? All right, you're concerned about your mouth, who made that? And here's what God's saying, like none of this is out of my domain. I can work miracles. I can make you speak just fine. Moses, again, fishing for excuses. Please, would you please send anybody but me? And I think God, in frustration, it says that God's angry. I think God's like, okay, I'll send your brother. All right? And I think the principle for you and I is, man, if I would just go with plan A and not, right? Well, God says do this. Oh, come on, God, can we do something else? And there might be a time or two in your life that God says, all right, look, fine. I don't know that this happens often. But God, because of his love for people, and he just wanted Moses to go, he said, fine, your brother will do fine. But you're going to go with him. And verses 18 to 23 is God basically saying, okay, we got that? Are we good? Okay, now that we've settled that, just go. If you're like me, you see places where you are like that. We just are an excuseful people. No, but I gave my life to Jesus. Okay, and I happen to personally, I brought that with me too. God asked me to do something. I mean, God, is it that big of a deal? God asked me to do something. I mean, can I do it later? All right, we come up with all kinds of excuses, particularly when it comes to those areas of our life where we feel like we're in a little bit of bondage. Ooh. I have to do this to get out of the bondage? You want me to take the part to do that? And we're like, God, it would just be so much easier in my marriage relationship if she would be the first one to say, I'm sorry. Okay. So I'm gonna not only want God's to free me from bondage, I want him to do it my way, and God says, I do it my way. Can I summarize for you what I think God says to you and to all of us who may find ourselves in this moment in a spot where we just feel like we're in a little bit of bondage? It's like, man, I just faced this long enough that I just wonder, is God even paying attention anymore? Let me give you 4 statements that we get from these excuses, this dialogue between Moses and back. The first thing that I think God says to you and I is, I'll be with you. God's presence means everything. I was just at a youth retreat, and Friday night, that's exactly what we talked about. We were talking about anxiety, and in Philippians chapter 4, this great verse on be anxious for nothing, the 4 words that come before be anxious for nothing is, the Lord is near. That changes everything. I mean, everything. And there are about 200 students that are in the upstate of Georgia right now who are finishing up this experience that God has been very near to them, and they've experienced it. I'll be with you. And God's promise for you and I in the midst of our most bondage feeling time is, hey, look, I will be with you. He is with us. He also says to us this, look, I'm restricted by nothing. You don't think your mouth works well? Okay, I'll take care of that. You don't think they're going to believe you? That's not outside the bounds of God's control. He's restricted by absolutely nothing. I mean, what I'm facing is a really big issue. It's a circumstance, it's a relationship, it's a habit, and I just don't think God is interested enough to do anything, and even if he was interested enough to do anything, I don't know that I'm just going to say it, I don't know that he can. And God says, I'm restricted by nothing. Next week, you're going to see a full dose of that. God is restricted by nothing. And then God says this, I'll make it happen. And in Moses' circumstance, it meant I will bring my people out of Egypt. I will make it happen. But like I said to you, I can't make false promises to you. I'm not going to do that. So what's God going to make happen? I'm not going to say that your circumstances are going to change. I can't promise you that. Well, then what does it mean when God says, I'll make it happen? He'll make what he wants to happen, happen. And it might be that your circumstances don't change at all, but in your circumstances, God changes you in ways that you can't even fathom. I'll make it happen, but I want it to happen my way. I want what I want to happen, happen. Which leads me to the last part, and that's this. God says to you and I, now trust me. I'll make it happen. What God deems to happen, he will make it happen. Trust him and go. Just do what he asks you to do. Small thing, big thing, whatever that might be. That might be, for some of us this morning, it means I'm going to take my first step in a relationship with God because of the death and resurrection of Jesus. That's a big old step. But God says, I'll free my people from bondage. Trust me and just go. Give your life to Jesus. For some of us, we need to redo that. Right? You don't get saved again, but I give my life to Jesus again because I've taken parts of it back. Give it back. It might be some small step that God is asking you to take, and you're like, I don't even know, is this going to make that much of a difference? Trust him. Just trust him. Because I think a lot of us, man, we ought to be, of all the people in the city of Sumter, all right, us and people and followers of Jesus that are in churches all around here, of all the people in the city of Sumter, in the state of South Carolina, in the nation of the United States, all across the planet, the people that have the most freedom and the most bondage-free people in the world ought to be Jesus people. Make it happen. Just go. And do whatever step that God is calling you into. Let me pray for us. Lord Jesus, thank you for your goodness. thank you. Great is your faithfulness. It's good. It's so good that we can